Hi. I'm grateful for this comment. I planned on making this video anyway, but it's a good conversation starter for the topic of how my husband and I don't get any like date days or date nights out. I have notes actually to help me stay on track with this conversation, and it might be a two-parter or hey, a three-parter video, I don't know, to just explain our situation, to both maybe make people not feel so alone if they're in a similar boat as we are, or to just enlighten people that might think, oh, it's because you don't trust anybody to leave your kids alone with or your mom alone with, when it's not that simple. In case you're wondering, what the heck is she talking about? If you're able to click this comment, it'll take you back to a video where I said my husband and I, for our 10th anniversary, went out on the town, and it was the first time since my son was 9 months old and he is now 8 years old. So that's where this comment is coming from. So to give a really brief introduction to our family, I live with my husband, my 2 kids, and my mom. My kids are 8, that's my son, and my daughter is 4, and my son is neurodivergent. I use the term neurodivergent so I don't anger this app. My daughter is neurotypical. My mom is disabled and needs to have full-time caregiving, and I became her caregiver when I was 16, and I became my dad's caregiver when I was 21. He passed in 2019, and that is our situation. I also wanted to say right off the bat, we don't qualify for respite care for my son or my mom. So I don't want you to go through this video going, just get respite care, just apply for that. We don't qualify for the fully funded version, and we would have to go to places and pay out of pocket, and we just can't afford that consistently, you know? So for my son, we knew something was up literally on the hospital drive home. We knew for certain by the time he was 3 months, and it was confirmed when he was 7 months. And without going into a lot of detail, of course, everything was knocked off the list. It wasn't colic, it wasn't silent reflux, it wasn't acid reflux, it wasn't anything. We tried remedies, medications, I joined support groups, and our days did not look like their days. My son, he couldn't tolerate the sound of my voice. He couldn't handle being touched. He couldn't handle water touching him. He would become visually overstimulated by colors and by fast movements. Certain sounds were extremely triggering for him. You couldn't look him in the eye. Things like that, in a nutshell. There's so much more, but I never meant for my content to be about that. And at 7 months, it was confirmed that he had sensory issues. And, you know, it's hard for doctors to come to terms with that at 7 months, and luckily we found those who did. Now, by then, I was becoming very open and vocal about what our day-to-day life was like. He didn't nap. He napped 20 minutes one time a day. He slept for 2 hours a night, broken sleep. One time I clocked in that he spent 14 hours a day crying. It was in no way a situation where we could ask anybody to say, hey, can you watch my son while we go out to dinner? Both because we wouldn't want to place that responsibility and stress on somebody, and we knew that that person would not be equipped to handle the situation through no fault of their own. It's just, it would be impossible. And that's not to say prior to me becoming more open about our situation, we did get offers. Of course we did, of like, hey, do you guys need like mommy and daddy day out? And then as it became evident what we were going through, the offers stopped, understandably. Now, when he was 9 months old, by then I had reconnected with a homeschool friend from my youth, and I would go over like once a day, or I mean like once a week, and hang out with her kids. She had 3 kids, and she said, you know, hey, you know what, let's give this a try. Bring him over during his nap time. And I'm like, that there's no such thing, because there wasn't. And I'll watch him, and you and your husband go out like for lunch, maybe like 2 hours. And I said, okay. And we did. We went down the street. We were gone an hour and a half. And when we returned, she was wearing him in a Tula baby carrier. And she said that he was fine. He was distant, not very responsive to things. But she followed what we said of like minimize eye contact. Don't like do rubbing, stroking the back or anything. And he seemed fine, and he was fine. So much so that I bought that baby carrier from her because it was like magic. But he did not want to be worn in it at home. I wore it with him in it out in public. But the day after and almost 2 weeks after, it was what we went through on a daily basis magnified by 100. He wasn't able to eat. We did baby-led weaning, and nursing was extremely hard because of that skin-to-skin contact, because he couldn't tolerate being held. We were using baby wipes then instead of bath because water was so painful for him. So even the baby wipes he couldn't tolerate, and I had to go back to whispering because he couldn't tolerate my voice. There was no sleep. I took the first half of the night. My husband took the second half of the night. There was no naps. And it was all directly after she watched him. And it was nothing she did. It was just the event itself. And we knew that at that time, at that point in time in life, we couldn't go through this. Both he couldn't go through it and we couldn't go through it. Fast forward a few months and we began OT. And he also had a psychologist. And they had not seen something like this in their careers. And the OT had been at it for 30 years. And they assessed him and realized he had anxiety. And it was almost as if he had abandonment issues without ever having been abandoned. It was exactly like how someone who went through abandonment would react to being left. It wasn't the same as like a normal anxiety a child has when they are left with a sitter or something. And fast forward again, and we're heading into like 2 years, and we still had not achieved having anybody watch him. Again, there were no offers, and we still didn't feel comfortable reaching out to people. And our OT said, okay, let's try this. And she's like, he's best out in public, which he was. Excuse me, my goodness. So she said, let's go to Target, and I will take him and watch him in Target, and you two, meaning me and my husband, will go around Target on like a little day shopping trip. And that way, if something goes wrong, we're all in the same vicinity of each other. But we couldn't make it work because when she could do that and get like authorization to do that, it couldn't correlate with my husband's work schedule, and he was a teacher at the time, so it's not like he could just take a partial day or come and go at the school he was at. So that never came to fruition, that method. Also during this time, we were trying to get him into a psychiatrist. There was only one in our state that accepted our insurance and saw adolescents at his age, and they were 3 hours away, and he needed a lot of testimonials from his doctors and everything, and without guarantee that he would be taken on, and it was deemed just not the best to do at that time. So that is why, at least on my son's front, we were unable to leave him with anybody to be babysat by or take him any place, like a friend's house or a family member's house. In addition to, we really just didn't have anybody to do that with. My parents couldn't, being disabled. My in-laws are 4 hours away, and our friends all have their lives, kids, work, and it didn't feel right to ask anybody either. Now, if we flip generations and go to my parents, when I was their caregiver, when my dad was alive as well, in the beginning, the caregiving was different than how it is now as age and health deteriorated. They could be left alone in the beginning of this journey, and that's how I was able to go to college part-time at night and day. My jobs at the time, I made it so that I had certain days off all the time, so those would be, you know, doctor days and treatment days. I made dinners and I prepped meals and I prepped medications. I never stayed over anybody's house because I needed to be home for bedtime and to make sure everything was okay because my dad was on oxygen and all this stuff. So in the beginning, I could leave them. I didn't have kids, so it didn't matter so much then, you know what I mean, in terms of like I need a day out away from my kids because I didn't have any kids. But then fast forward, and it became less and less viable to leave them for long periods of time. By then, I'm going to go into 2010. My mom, we finally got approved for her to have an aide, and she was fantastic. She was with us for 10 years. So when I was married by then and had my son, if my husband and I went to go visit his family overnight or for 2 nights, I could prep things, prep food, prep medications, all that good stuff, and the aide would come over for an hour or 2 each day to clean, do a quick grocery shop if something was necessary. But again, still didn't address having my son taken care of for my husband and I to go do our own thing. And then by the time my dad passed, my mom needed full-time caregiving and company. Since we lost my mom's fantastic aide, who, it just sounds silly to say that because she's like family, and she still is, we have been through multiple agencies and we still have not found anybody that meshed, and we're trying to look into getting me compensation to do it instead, since I do it anyway. But the agencies, the state, they divide up how much time you get for home care and personal care. Home care is like chores, and personal care is like companionship and showers and things like that. And my mom was up to like 2 hours a week. And it would still have to be during the day, and that's when my husband is working. And then certain agencies put in some stipulations because my mom's a fall risk. They wanted me to be home. And then other agencies said, well, you get your 2 hours or your 1 hour, because it kept flip-flopping, but it's still during the day, and my husband's working, and still doesn't account for watching my kids so that he and I could go do our own thing together. So what happened was, a couple months ago, my mom's cousin came over for brunch. And after just seeing everything, she was like, I think I could come over and hang out with everybody so you and hubby can go out. And it's not that I didn't believe her, but we hadn't had an offer in a really long time. Hang on. We hadn't had an offer in a really long time. And my knee-jerk reaction was no. And I didn't tell her no, but, you know, after, for so long, things being so difficult, it's hard to get on board with an offer. And by then, my son had made a lot of great strides. There are daily difficulties, but with, you know, he was nonverbal for a period of time, but with improvement in communication, we opened up a lot of doors for management. And that still doesn't mean things aren't difficult, but we have strategies for coping with aftermath and overload and meltdowns. But it's still unpredictable, and it was still hard for me to get on board with somebody undertaking that without experience, you know. But the sneaky thing, who my husband is, approached my mom's cousin and said, hey, you know, our anniversary's coming up, how do you feel? And she was thrilled. She was absolutely thrilled to be asked. She said she felt honored. And overall, the day went really well. And somehow even my mom and my kids kept it a secret. So I found out the day of that this was happening. And I wasn't nervous to leave them. It was just very overwhelming. So she would text going, hey, you know, this happened, or how does this get handled? You know, my mom is very low maintenance as long as everything is fine. You know, I worry about falling, and but she has a fall button, and as long as somebody is there to, you know, let help in or whatever, everything is fine. And, you know, my kids were fine. And like I said, she would text with questions and food questions because he has oral aversion and everything like that. And he was so, like, just overloaded in a good way. He was passed out, asleep cold when we got home. My daughter had just woken up and she was so overwhelmed to see us. And, you know, a byproduct of all of this is that she's never experienced being alone, and she's 4. So she had that natural overwhelmed response of mommy and daddy are home. And she even would randomly burst out crying like the following 2 days, thinking about everything. And that was overwhelming to experience as well. And I know it is a natural response, but one we never experienced again, you know, and she never experienced given the circumstances. And my son was very overloaded the following 2 days, and so we kept homeschool light and easy, and he needed a lot of crunchy foods to help him through his aversion. And you know, it was a lot of, I always ask permission if I can give him a hug or a kiss, and I let him know that it's hairbrushing time, but I was very aware and chose flowy clothing because he was overloaded. But it was okay, and it was something, again, that we could manage. So could this be something that's more regular? Maybe. It's something to discuss with my mom's cousin. We live about 40 minutes away from each other, an hour. But it could be something that's more regular, but not like regular once a week, once a month, once every other month. I'm not sure. It's something to discuss now that this has happened, but this is what our journey has been. So for this comment to say this is tragic, it kind of made me feel meh. You know, I don't view my life and circumstances as tragic. It's just my life. My life isn't tragic. And I'm so grateful for my husband. You know, we've weathered a lot. On both ends of having kids and at a parental level. So I will say that if we weren't the couple we were and are, that we wouldn't have weathered what we have weathered so successfully, and that we were always on the same page, and we've always been supportive of each other as individuals and as a couple, and that we don't let these circumstances inhibit our relationship. It just means we have to approach it differently. And that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. So I hope if you are going through something like this in your own life, that you know you're not alone, because it can feel kind of lonely, especially if you're surrounded by people who are not going through this. Be it on the end of having some circumstances with your children, or circumstances with your parents or anybody else who you're caregiving of an older generation in your life. Thanks for listening. And I hope you're doing well. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.